tell you is he bribed the boys with being here, that they're out gorging on donuts as we speak. And I'll be dealing with them for the rest of the afternoon on a sugar high. But thank you, Katie. Here's what I'd like to do for just a couple of minutes. I mean, last night I talked about some bigger themes. I talked about the gut checkpoint that we find ourselves at as a country. I think it's exemplified in the Tea Parties that's sprung up across this country. I talked about the gut checkpoint that we find ourselves really as a party as well. And Kate commended me afterwards and said, Mark, you were incredibly well behaved last night. It was happy talk, it was pleasant talk, but I would like to leave the mountaintop for 1 second, much to Kate's dismay, and instead take it down to the valley of nuts and bolts for just 1 second, and really talk about not the nation, not the country, not the party, but where we are as a conservative movement in South Carolina on the nuts and bolts front. And I think in many ways at times there's a disconnect wherein words don't meet actions. And I'll go back to what I said so many times before about this larger notion of brands. A political movement or a political party is really nothing more than a brand in the world of ideas. And the great brands throughout time get where they get because there's consistency as to what they are about. There's a connect between what they say they're about and what they're actually about. So you buy a Caterpillar bulldozer because you know it'll do that which a cat does. Or you buy a John Deere tractor because you know it'll in fact run like a deer. And so I think that, in other words, the great brands across time can't have their cake and eat it too. They've got to consistently be about that which they're about. Which brings me to the larger conundrum of where we are as a conservative movement in South Carolina. And Caden and so many of you all have worked so hard on this front. And I want to say thank you again for the difference that y'all's work will make in the lives of the boys that just gave you the pledge, and frankly other two boys that are over in Camden right now to shoot the contest. And so Caden has done a fabulous job. You all are doing a fabulous job. But I think in many ways we don't honor your work in Columbia based on at times a disconnect between what we say we're about and what we're about. And I can give you different examples, but let me just give you one. And it has been the basis of a real serious tug of war, a legitimate tug of war over the last couple of weeks, and that's on the stimulus package. As you know, the stimulus package has caused a lot of friction. It's caused a lot of wear and tear. And my plan was to say, look, let's take 10% of the total of what will come into South Carolina based on stimulus money and allocate it to paying down debt. And a lot of folks legitimately said that's not such a good idea. I had a conversation with the Greenville editorial writer the other day, and they blistered me in some editorial, and I said, okay, I got it that you don't like our plan, but tell me yours. And she says, well, I think our plan is that what we would do, we spend all the money, and we hope that the economy would be better, and then that way we will avoid the $744 million hole that we will otherwise end up in 24 months. And I said, okay, well, I hope that too. But Gordon Sullivan, who was former Chief of Staff in the United States Army, wrote a compelling book called Hope is Not a Method. And his premise was, while we all hope for the best, at times we got to plan for the worst in life. And so I said, I hope for that too. I know every South Carolinian hopes for that too. But what if that doesn't happen? And she says, well, then we're toast. And I said, what kind of approach is that? Can you imagine being a fiduciary or a trustee and saying, well, our plan is if it all works out as we hope, we're going to be okay, but if not, we're toast. And yet that, in many ways, is the budget that I have on my desk this very weekend, that I will work on with my team throughout the weekend, that is at play. Because what we have is a budget that actually compels me to spend every dime of the stimulus money. And by so doing, I think in many ways guarantee a $744 million hole 24 months from now, a $450 million hole come next year. It will guarantee that we continue to be fourth in the United States of America in what we allocate to pay down in interest rather than having that money to pay for teachers or health care. It will, in essence, ensure that we don't make reforms that in many cases have been long overdue. It will ensure a number of things that I think are at odds with the very conservative movement that you all are a part of. But I want everybody to know that those funds have been certified. We have not accepted them, but we certified them, so the money can't run off to New Jersey or California, despite the misleading ads that are running on television right now. The money is here. And the other is on this larger common sense notion of what do we do with it? Do we spend it all, or do we actually allocate some to set aside for yet other rainy days that might come our way? And I think that second principle is a common sense principle. Because and you were a prudently managed household, you would say, well, let's take some money to set aside to pay down a credit card balance or to paying off a mortgage. You'd set some money aside. You wouldn't spend it all. The Bible, I even jotted down a couple of notes. In Proverbs, talks about this notion of money. It says, in the household of the wise, there are stores of choice grains and oil. Now, stores, that can store up a few things. It says, only a fool consumes all that he has. It says, the borrower and so I think that there's some awfully simple principles at work here, some of which are built on nature, some of which are common sense in nature, and some of which are just flat out financial in nature. If you're fourth in the United States of America in what you allocate to paying down in debt, wouldn't it make some sense to pay off some of that debt so that in the first 2 years alone, the first 24 months alone, you get a $168 million dividend that could then in fact be used on a recurring basis to pay for teachers or health care or other vital services of government? I think that at the core it's about this. Do we limit spending and enact reforms that in many cases have been long overdue? And I could give you a long list of those. Take, for instance, Terry. We've been having a conversation about Terry in the entire 6.5 years I've been in office, where somebody gets to retire twice at the state level. It was originally designed to reward great teaching. Court case comes down and says, we can't apply just to teachers, got to apply to every state worker. It blows more than $1 billion hole in our retirement system. And everybody's saying we need to do something about it. It's only in these kinds of tough times that, in fact, you can enact a reform like that. And I could give you a litany of other examples of, again, do we enact cost savings within government and government reforms, or do we just gloss over that, take all the money, and worry about what comes from reforms? That's the choice, in essence, that we're in. And it's in some ways deeper than that simple choice. It's also about transparency. You may have followed it, you may not have followed it. But the vote that passed in the House side was that said you have to spend all this money was a voice vote. You will never know how your House member voted on that. To the credit of Nikki Haley, she and 17 others stood out. We just had a debate on that a year ago. I thought we were going to record votes that were, again, on gut check moments like the one we find ourselves in. So I just think that, you know, it's not popular in all circles, I get it. But I'm going to deal with that budget over the weekend. We will return it back to the House and Senate come Tuesday. And I'm simply saying I ask for y'all's help. I think it needs to go back to the drawing board and come back with more in the way of common sense, much closer to where Greg Ryberg and Tom Davis were with the so-called Ryberg. I'm well past my allotted time. Kate is going to start kicking me if I don't watch out. So I will quickly sit down, but let me just leave you with a couple names and me leaving you with a homework assignment. On the House side, 65% of the Republicans voted for the idea of spending all the stimulus money, and 35% didn't. The 35% didn't. I'd ask you, give them a pat on the back. And their names are as follows: Valentine, Duncan, Huggins, Millwood, Rice, Merle Smith, Stringer, Byers, Bedingfield, Haley, Lowe, Manning, Scott, Gary Smith, Thompson, Tom Young, Crawford, Hamilton, Merrill, Ted Pitts, Simmerl, Stewart, and Toole.